and I'll put it in the mix.
Dope. Do you find the same applies also for bass in terms of reamping?
Bass is a weird one. I'm finding more these days that I'm not running bass through a real amp at all.
You're just DIing it.
Just DI, sometimes through some pedals, through a Sans amp or a Dark Glass make a bunch of amazing pedals now for bass, especially for heavy tones.
Yes, I've heard great things about it.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And often clients will come with that as well and be like, oh, this is my sound is just this pedal. It's like, okay, cool. Let's do that. But I'm doing a lot of processing in the mix to that DI'd or pedal tone to make it fit. Because there's the metal bass is a bit weird in what its actual function is.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. Yeah. Like, I listened recently to a podcast with Eyal Levi on the Working Class Audio podcast, and he was talking about how bass tone is in metal just doesn't work like other genres, and I wanted to ask you about how that works.
Yeah. I hear it a lot from any metal engineer you're going to hear interviewed on podcasts when the topic of bass comes up. It's strange because you're looking for the sub element to connect with the kick drum and the top end to sort of tuck in nicely with the guitar and add definition to the part. And then everything in between is kind of unnecessary. So you're taking all the extreme tops off it and most of the mid-range out of it, and then just sort of tucking it in behind those two other elements. The kick drum and guitars are normally going to be your loudest parts of a metal mix, or some of the loudest elements in a metal mix. So everything else has got to sort of squish in around that. And bass is definitely the bit that gets pushed to the back furthest.
How does that make you feel as a bass player?
In my band, in Bastardizer, we've only got one guitar player, which was unusual for me when I first joined because lots of heavy bands have two guitarists and a bass player. For me, I get my bass kicks out of playing in the band and when our guitarist Bill is doing solos and stuff, I'm still playing a very much a dominant part of the sound.
Yeah.
But on a record, it's just got to work, So if the mix needs a loud kick drum and loud guitars, you can't have loud bass as well.
Yeah,
and there's back to the subgenre thing. There's lots of little subgenres where this
not true.
Sort of general idea is out the window. There's lots of technical and progressive music that's classed as metal. That's led by the bass guitar.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different ballgame. But yeah, for most of the work I'm doing, it's, the bass is
you got to fit it in.
You got to fit it in.
Yeah.
And if the bass player's playing something cool, it does a cool little lick, or there's a section that's bass led, bit of automation to bring him to the front, and then tuck it back when the guitars kick back in.
Interesting. So it sounds like you're doing most of this work after the recording in the mix stage using EQ, unless I'm wrong.
For bass, yeah, it's mostly EQ, and what's pretty common with heavy records is separating the bass out into different elements,
splitting it.
So you're splitting it, yeah. So 2 or 3 tracks sometimes that are sort of band passed. Into just what you need, and then you blend all of those back in to make a complete bass sound.
Got it. So you kind of have like a sub, like 100 hertz, 100 hertz and below that you're kind of trying to make it work with the kick drums, fundamental. Yep. And then and then maybe like mid range, you're mostly dipping out, and then somewhere in the higher mids, or I guess maybe the mid mids. Something that works with the guitars.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. It's the sub part is probably 250 and down.
Oh, okay.
And then depending on what else is going on in the mix, the top end is 800 to about 4 or 6K.
Okay. Yeah.
And then those are the two main bits.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you're saying that, because 600 hertz, I would say that's like the aggressive frequency of a P bass. That's like that's what helps the P bass poke through the mix. And
totally.
Yeah. So I totally feel that. That makes sense.
When it's more distorted bass that you're trying to bring out against heavy guitars, it's around the like 1 to 1.5K sort of area is where you really hear the pick attack and that's the useful part of the zing.
That's the punchy mid range, I like to think of it as.
Yeah, totally. That's it.
Awesome. We got two bass players on this episode geeking out a little bit. So apologize to the listeners for that.
Sorry for all the guitarists and vocalists who are having a nap during that bit.
Yeah. But so it's interesting what you were talking about, how you come together with the song. So it sounds like metal bands don't do a ton of live tracking these days, like together, like the band in a room.
In the stuff that I'm working on, it's very rare. We might do a demo recording of everybody playing in the room, but the precision that's required from these sort of records, it has to be multi-tracked. It has to be everybody one at a time, deep focus on the parts, usually some editing as well. And sometimes there's no vibe of a real band at all on the finished record, and other times you're creating that with some use of space or room mics, or recording the thing that I'm into at the moment is recording the guitar amps and the drums in the same room, even though the guitars were recorded a week before, a month before, whenever it happens to be. Having that it's still a unified sound that happened in a real space, I'm finding it does help gel all of this together, but you've still got the precision and the exact detail that's needed.
Oh, that's crazy. So you're just running out, you're just like almost like reamping, I guess, again.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And, the riffs and the drumming is so technical and so complicated. You need to zero in on the details and get them right, because otherwise it sounds messy. It's sloppy and the listeners aren't going to connect to it. It's not going to fulfill the band's vision of sounding competitive against their favorite records. It's a super important part of working with these bands is nailing that precision and focusing on those details and getting them right, whether you have to edit it or just get the musician to play it over and over till they nail it. Mm-hmm. It's just got to be done.
You do a lot of comping of takes, I'm imagining.
Yeah, it's pretty common.
Yeah.
I try to avoid the looping of parts. I have done earlier in my career some records with bands that probably weren't ready for the studio, but I didn't know any better, they didn't know any better, and to get it right, you're sort of building a good performance of the riff, like of just one time through the riff.
Yeah.
And then it becomes like Lego, and you copy and paste that wherever it goes, and, and then repeat for the next riff. What I try to get these days is a whole section at least. Okay, cool. Let's do the verse. You can do it better. Do it again. Okay, that's the one. Maybe nudge a couple of notes around in Pro Tools and then do the next bit. Yeah, so there is a bit of comping that goes on and a bit of manipulating.
Are you using like Flex Audio? Like, are you stretching things out, or are you mostly just slicing and dicing?
It depends on the instrument. Guitars, I'm doing more flexing because it's smaller adjustments.
Yeah,
that I'm finding need to be made, and because I'm working with a DI and reamping later, you can flex it a little without messing with the pitch of the note.
Yeah, and with little artifacts.
Yeah. On the DI, there's very very little in the way of artifacts.
Oh,
and
good.
Then you're running it through an amp afterwards anyway, so that kind of hides the wizardry that you've
created,
performed on the takes. And then the drums is just slice and dice. Beat Detective in Pro Tools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you're quantizing it basically, or not really?
Yeah, but I'm trying to move away from just smashed to the grid, rigid robot performances. I think that's fine if it needs it, and if it's part of the vibe, especially if there's lots of programmed stuff. Some of the bands have whole orchestras worth of MIDI stuff to go along with their records, and that's all precise because it's all programmed in the computer. So some of those types of bands, it does need to be precisely on the grid. Others, you can let it breathe a little.
Yeah, so you're nudging things around, I guess, in that sense.
Nudging or using the humanize features that Beat Detective and the Pro Tools quantiers have to sort of, so it's all precise and then not so much. There's a bit of margin for error sort of built in to those features.
Amazing. So other than the bass tone thing, what are a few things that someone who's a noob at metal production should be aware of before working with a heavy band?
Oh, wow. It's just got to be right is the big one. It's got to be precise. Again, if you're working with a vibey stoner rock or doom band, the tempos are a lot slower. It's a bit more loose. Have at it. Just capture what the band are doing. For lots of other stuff, get it in tune and get it in time, and then all the other issues of guitar tone and mixing tricks, it's all secondary to it just being tight and in tune. We'll sit here with the guitar tuner up all the time. We're making sure, and I'm listening for it as well.
Yeah,
just tuning after every take.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like it's a constant battle against things being out of tune, especially because so many bands are tuning lower and lower and lower. Every couple of years, a band comes out and they're another step or half step lower than the one before. It's getting a bit crazy. I mean, there's bands playing now in. It seems so normal to me because I'm in that little bubble. But
this sounds like a grind to me, honestly. Like,
yeah, it kind of is. It's not a holiday making these sort of records, but it's fun.
Yeah,
the fun is still there to be had.
You got to love it, right?
Definitely. Yeah, you've got to love it. And like some on the tuning thing, some bands are in E an octave down on the guitars, and then the bass is even lower. So you're dealing with extended scale guitars with thick strings in these crazy low tunings, and the parts are really technical, and it's every part of that is going to affect the tuning. How does he pick? How does the pick strike the string? Is he bending the note with his fretting hand? You've got to be watching for all of it. So if there's somebody out there listening and making metal that's looking for how to make things better, that's where you start. Just that it's in tune and that you've got your instruments set up properly. Yeah.
Can't advocate for getting your instruments set up enough.
For sure.
So do you have any templates?
I do. I have a mix template that's a routing sort of arrangement. Mm-hmm. So it's got all my buses for the instrument groups lined up. It's got some effects that I like using that just sort of
ready to go.
That I've come to like. The drum reverbs that I'm using, I'm not going to play around with trialing different reverb plugins. I have the ones I like. They're in the template ready to go. Some records might need more or less, but I've got them there.
Right, like how much you send to it, that's that dependent, but the actual reverb itself.
If you find one you like, stick with it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And all of that set up just to basically at the end of the tracking, everything gets dragged onto tracks in that template, and then all the routing's taken care of, and then the actual mix can start.
Amazing. Are you're doing kind of like a top-down approach to mixing?
Yeah, I think making modern records and working in the box, that's as the most straightforward work